Welcome to the third episode of the Fearless Hour, a time for saving graces. My name is Dr. Tameer Siddiqui, and I'm here with the show's founder and producer, D. Patrick Miller. The saving grace of this episode is creativity. But before we get into that, I have a special announcement. Right now, we're working on the hour's first spinoff to be called the Fearless Extra, which will be single feature shows of 30 minutes. In each extra, I'll be interviewing one author or artist for the full half hour. These extras will be of special interest to students of A Course in Miracles because our first three planned guests are course-inspired authors, all of whom have something to do with Fearless Literary. Just a coincidence, of course. For the first extra, scheduled to post on YouTube later this month, I'll be spending a half hour with Gary Renard, author of the famous Disappearance of the Universe series, along with his wife, Cindy Laura Renard, a published author and talented musician in her own right. I'll be checking in with them to see how they've been doing, and we'll be asking how they applied their teachings of true forgiveness in the wake of this pandemic and all that this year has brought upon us. I'll also be sure to find out if they have any updates for us in terms of any upcoming publications to see how they are nurturing their creativity at a time like this. Speaking of creativity, what does this episode look like, Patrick?
Well, this is the first, but hopefully not the last hour devoted to the saving grace of creativity. I'm very glad to welcome a behind-the-scenes player in the hour, my old friend Barry Cleveland, who composed and performed the theme song that you hear in the opening of each show. In this episode, I'll be using another of his pieces for some segues, and we'll also see three videos of his unusually inventive instrumentation, and that of some of his amazing musical friends. As usual, Dr. Tameer will give the educated message about our show's theme. And then we're getting creative with a feature interview that has a guest interviewer as well as a guest. When I decided I wanted to talk to my friend, Michael Welch, a digital painter in Sebastopol, California, I wasn't entirely sure of where it would go, because of my almost total lack of art smarts. I mean, I know what I like, but not much more. In the nick of time, I met a quadruple threat creative artist, a writer, painter, performer, and videographer named Rose Pearson, who brings a bit more depth to the interview. Then the hands of Rose will appear in this episode's closing meditation, as she combines all her skills to create and meditate her way through an original artwork.
We hope you are inspired to create and meditate on your own original work as well. And if you are so moved, please contribute to the spread of the hour by telling friends about it, making a small contribution, or sponsoring an ad on the Fearless Hour show page, which you can link to from www.fearlessbooks.com. Believe it or not, we don't have Hollywood-style funding for this, the first ever video variety show devoted to spiritual but not religious qualities of the good life and tough times. So both Patrick and I will especially appreciate your support, as will all the viewers of the hour to come. Right now, let's meet the music man behind the Fearless Hour theme song, Barry Cleveland.
I'm here with Barry Cleveland, one of my favorite musicians ever. And in fact, he kind of plays a key role in the origin of this show. And about a year ago, when I first started to get this crazy idea to do this show, I was under a number of delusions about how easy it would be. And as I began to study and realize that I was going to have to learn video editing and some casting and producing, I just felt overwhelmed. But the thing I kept going back to was, I've got to do it because I have a theme song. And the theme song is Barry's wonderful instrumental piece, Ritual Sticks, which features you, Barry, and Mike Maisley. And is there anybody else on that?
Oh yeah, all of the percussion, the electronic percussion and the acoustic percussion, of which there's quite a bit, is Michael Pluznik.
Oh, okay.
And then Robert Powell, pedal steel player, who's I've worked with a lot. He's on a number of records of mine. Great player. I think that's it on that one. It's just Mike, Robert. There's no. I think I'm just playing synth bass on that piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's 4 of us.
So anyway, that's what everyone hears at the first minute of the show with the logo. And I knew I wanted to use that piece, so it's going to have to get this show on. So it sort of propelled me to do that. Beyond that, in the show, I'm going to use for some of my segs a little bit of voluntary dreaming because it's great background ambient stuff. And then we're going to feature 3 pieces, and I just want to go over them with you briefly. Before that, however, I've always been curious as to how would you describe what you do musically? Do you identify with a genre? Do you identify with a movement? Or
You would think that after all these years, I would have an answer to that question at hand and be able to easily respond. No, my music is what record label people would refer to probably as a marketing nightmare. It's all over the place. So like the earlier stuff tends to be more what it's now called ambient, and there's electronic elements to the first couple of records. Then Volcano, it's all based on African and Afro-Haitian percussion. All of those rhythms that are on that album are sacred rhythms, and there's an interesting story that's too long to tell about that. That's all Michael Pluznik and a bunch of other great drummers from the Bay Area for the most part playing those things. But that's got Norbert Stachel, great saxophone, flautist, clarinetist on it, Michael Manring. It's more like a world fusion jazz record. Then Hologrammatron, a record I did about 10 years ago, is, I don't know what you would call that, but it got reviewed a lot by progressive rock people, and it played on those, sort of things. And it's all over the place. The record itself is so eclectic, I'm not sure what you'd call it. It ranges from like crazy, almost metal level stuff to covers of 60s pop tunes, and then a lot of other stuff in between. Then I did a record a few years ago with Richard Pignas, a great French guitarist and synthesist, legendary musician. And that's also with Michael Manring and a drummer, Celso Alberti. Celso's on Hologrammatron too. And that's entirely improvised music. That's a Cuneiform label. I think that's one of the best records I've ever been involved with.
Yeah, and one thing I've always been impressed with is that you're so inventive, and you bring in other people for lots of different kind of synthesis. And I've always thought you can't just sit down and play the guitar. You've got to mess with it.
Yeah.
And there should be a genre for that, like inventive music. I don't think there is. But that's always been my, impression of what you do, that you just got to tinker with it. You got to,
That's accurate. So I don't think of myself as really even a guitar player. I mean, I play at a certain level. I play well enough to hold my own, in a lot of different settings. But a lot of what I do, the processing of the guitar happens in real time as I'm playing, because I use a lot of stuff. Like if I could point the camera down here, you'd see I have a lot of pedals and things that I use. And these days I'm playing through a unit called a Helix, which has all sorts of different types of amplifiers and effects built into it. But then once the guitar parts are recorded, a whole lot of what I do is post-production. It's in the actual mixing stage and processing stage. So you're absolutely right. That's exactly
right. Well, let's run through, do a brief preview of these 3 pieces, because I think they each of them have interesting stories. The first one is your composition on guitar called Arab Spring, but it was part of a project called the $100 Guitar Project.
Yes, so that's a great project. It was done for charity. There's about 30 just world-class guitar players on it. A lot of my heroes. I'm very honored to be part of it. But the story is a couple of guys bought a guitar on eBay for $100, an old cheap, junky guitar. And it was passed from artist to artist, and we all did something with it. The guitar arrived in a cardboard box in not really what you would call any sort of tuning, recognizable tuning. So I did bring the strings up to the nearest pitch, but I just left it in this crazy tuning and played it as an open tuned instrument, which I never do. I played it with my fingers and some other little gizmos, which I don't really play that way. And I was just fooling around with it, and this music, it just appeared out of nowhere, that tune. So I recorded very quickly. I recorded all these different parts and overlaid them, and that's what that video is that I think I'm going to show. So yeah, and I'm using the little bow hammer thing that I got from Michael Maisley. I'm using all kinds of gizmos on that, but it's mostly just the spirit of really fast improv and creativity, and the piece just appears out of nowhere, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So the second piece is a looping demonstration using some Jimi Hendrix music, but you're playing around a lot. Were you actually demonstrating equipment, or what was?
So that has a couple of purposes. Yes, the looper that I used, called a boomerang looper. At the time, I was an editor at Guitar Player magazine, and I was reviewing that for the magazine. But also what that is about is several times I've gone to Wrocław, Poland to play at the Jimi Hendrix Festival there. And so I worked up this Hendrix piece. The challenging part about that is that you're trying to play all the parts using the looper. So you have to kind of reduce the piece to its essential elements and then work out a way of layering the parts, getting into it and getting out of it, where you keep the essential vibe of the tune. I tried to get, it to sound like Hendrix,
right.
But at the same time, it's not Hendrix at all. It's a completely different thing.
Right.
The one thing that I really loved about that, and I performed that piece in Wrocław. The thing that I love about it is there's on that tune, Jimmy is talking about, his voice comes in and he's talking about, he's an alien from outer space and he's talking about the people on Earth. So I isolated that voice, which I found somewhere online. I put it on my phone. And then
okay.
piece, I hold the phone over the pickups on the guitar, and that's Jimmy's voice comes in. Then I loop that and then drop it down an octave, which is exactly what he does on the record. So it's like, I'm talking about chickens, on the earth, Jimmy. But that I think is the coolest part of that whole performance, is just that it's got his voice doing that. And I make it go backwards and do things.
And just because my technical understanding is not great, a looper copies a musical phrase you're doing, and repeats it so that you can layer it into the music.
So I think on the boomerang, I have a device, you can kind of see it behind me here, that has a lot of looping tracks. This is a super sophisticated one, but the boomerang is a little pedal-sized thing. I believe that one had 3 tracks on it. So you play in a part, you hit a switch, it starts repeating that part. Then you overdub, you have another loop going, and they're independent loops. And then you can do things like you drop it down to half speed and it transposes the pitch down an octave. So, or if you recorded it lower and then hit it, it would transpose it up an octave. So you can get cool effects. There's also a reverse function on it. So I was doing a lot of little tricks with it. When you look at the video, because I was doing it also as a kind of demo for the magazine, I put in little, notes, and it tells you exactly what I'm doing at each stage. So you can kind of follow along.
Okay. And our third piece is, it's about 4 minutes snipped out of I think an hour-long performance by Cloud Chamber, which was you and our mutual friend Mike Maisley and Michael Manring and a couple other guys.
Ian Ryder, great cellist, plays at the Oakland East Bay Symphony, studied with Ali Akbar Khan, fantastic cellist, and Joe Vinagoni playing percussion and hammer dulcimer. That's the group, I think. Yeah, with Michael, and me.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And one reason I wanted to get Michael into this is because so few people, unless you used to hang out on the streets of Oakland, Berkeley, you have never seen the bowhammer cymbalom, which he invented. And that music, Cloud Chamber, really is indescribable. I mean, what is it?
Right. No, there are some really colorful descriptions that critics had of it. I don't paraphrase them because I'd ruin them, but yeah. So the gist of Cloud Chamber is that this group had no material. And everything we did was entirely improvised, whether it was a live performance or the album that we recorded, and Dark Matter, which you can still find. Can I plug that? You can find that on.
Yeah, sure.
In fact, it's everywhere for digital download.
Yeah.
But it was particularly funny. Like when we were booking gigs or something, you talk to the person and they go, "So what do you do?" You go, we don't really have any material. Right.
It's
so,
like Seinfeld. It's a song about nothing.
But so the group there were no restrictions whatsoever. We just would walk on stage or start recording, and whatever came out of the ether is what we had. So we were. I wouldn't say we were ever horrible when we performed live. We were professional enough to be presentable. People never threw fruit at us or demanded their money. Anything. But there were those times, maybe 10% of the time, 20%, when it happened. And there's nothing like that. It's you.
Yeah, I made one of those shows, I remember, and it was memorable. Yeah.
Yes. At the end of it, you just look around at each other and go, "What in the world was that?" and how lucky are we to be participating in this?
Right.
Just such a thrill to do that.
Yeah, and to me, that's the secret of real creativity is not that you pull off something that you planned, but that something happens you didn't expect.
Yeah, well, so much of my music, I mean, you're asking about sort of a thread maybe that runs through it. The improvisation runs through it. And I think, like I mentioned a minute ago, the record, it's called Mu, M-U, that I did with Richard Pinhas, Michael Mannering, and Celso Alberti, the great Brazilian drummer. All improvised. That came out, I think, 4 years ago. That was, Richard was in from France, and we did some shows around the Bay Area, but there was only one day that we could get the quartet together all at the same time because they were all touring and doing different things. We recorded the basic tracks for that entire album in about 2 hours, 3 hours. So anybody who's ever done improvised music or tried to record it knows that you very rarely get more than a few minutes of a good stretch going of something, and then it tends to break down or meander or something. There's a piece that's nearly 30 minutes on that album. That it's played the way you hear it on the album. It's 30 minutes of consistent changing, altering stuff that covers a huge variety of territory. But that's what happened. So that was super lucky, because if we hadn't had that experience, time was up. There'd be no record. So,
and it's one thing to improvise on your own, but to bring in another person, then 2 people, then 3 people.
Well, that's where the magic happens. There's a chemical interaction between people, and then if you put that in front of an audience, the audience becomes a factor too. There's a feedback loop that starts to happen with the audience, and even the dullest audience, people around the world, everywhere, they all recognize when this is happening. They recognize when something important is happening there on the stage, and they're getting into it, and then they give you the energy, and they become part of that process, and it's. I live for that stuff. So, or it's the same in the studio when I'm working. A lot of times, you sit down. 1 minute there's nothing, and 10 minutes later there's something, and sometimes it's really great something, and I fall out of my chair laughing, a lot, literally. I don't know.
Well, that's a great way to work. And I have you linked from our show page, but is barrycleveland.com the best access?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you'll find more than any reasonable person would ever want to know about me. If
Okay.
you want to hear my music, though, like actually just stream it and listen to it, I would go to my Bandcamp page.
Well, thanks so much for being so original and creative, and for whether you meant to or not, providing the first sound that this show had. And we will seg from here right into the video of Arab Spring. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And I'm really happy that my music is your theme music on your shows.
When we think about creativity, it's easy to bring to mind Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and Darwin's Origin of Species. It's clear that creativity can result in major contributions to human civilization, such as those described. But that doesn't always have to be the case. In fact, creativity is not just something reserved for the few gifted geniuses of the world, but rather, creativity is an ability that can be nurtured in each and every one of us, and it can be our saving grace if we choose to cultivate it. We can do that by being open to new ideas and experiences. Psychologists usually define creativity as the capacity to produce ideas that are both original and adaptive. In other words, creativity enables a person to adjust to new circumstances and to solve problems that arise. This essentially means that creativity is key for adaptation and survival. Our impulse to create arises from natural curiosity with the world. We create to understand and to connect, sometimes with others, sometimes with ourselves, but always to join with something greater. Our minds want to reach out, to transcend the limits of time and space, to explore the world we live in and invent new ones through art, dance, poetry, writing, photography, and any other form of creative expression. As we feed our natural curiosity, we make it possible to sharpen our creative abilities, and in this way, we all have the potential to be creative. From a mental health perspective, psychologist and art therapist Dr. Kathy Melchiotti cited multiple studies confirming that being creative can increase positive emotions, lessen depressive symptoms, reduce stress, decrease anxiety, and even improve immune system functioning. If you look at the emerging field of post-traumatic growth, you will see how individuals struggling with trauma use their own narratives to turn their adversity into personal growth. The process of confronting our own demons or facing our fears through creative self-expression is fundamentally therapeutic and allows a person to be proactive in their own healing. I know my own survival depended on it. I spent years feeling unseen and unheard, buried deep underneath the canyons of my dark, painful past experiences. It was through self-expressive writing that I had learned to turn to myself, see and hear the little girl in me, and love her in ways that made her feel seen and heard. I stayed with this painfully rewarding creative process long enough to learn that there was nothing to fear, and that the original and adaptive ideas will always come to help me adjust to my new circumstances and to help me overcome my problems. I never really felt like the life-changing and life-saving ideas were coming from my wounded self, but rather from the highest version within me. I felt as though these ideas would flow through me, as though I was a conduit or a channel. I believe the highest version of ourselves is eager and ready to be our saving grace through creative expression only when we create the space for it and invite it into our hearts and minds. For I believe it is the nature of the world or the universal mind to want to explore new possibilities and to break the barriers that limit who we are. And I believe it is the saving grace of creativity that allows us to do just that.
I'm very happy to be here with two remarkable artists. I don't want to give too many props to Mark Zuckerberg, but I did meet both of them through Facebook. Michael Welch, we met with 3 or 4 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, you showed up at one of my like an opening in the
Yeah, you had a
Marin.
artist studio showing back when we could do those things.
Yeah.
And we've corresponded ever since.
Yeah.
And I guess it was about a little over a month ago, I decided to do this episode on creativity, and I wanted to interview you. And but I was a little afraid of not having a good enough art education to converse meaningfully. So I sort of put out this vague intention to find an artist to come in and talk with you. And I was racking my brain for people I knew and coming up with nothing. And lo and behold, within a week, Rose and I crossed paths on Facebook. Almost the first thing I knew about her were the 2 videos that will be at the end of the show. And voila, I had my artist. So what we're going to do here is sort of a virtual gallery show, as if we were walking through a show of your paintings. And I'm going to let Rose mostly carry the ball on it. And I will chime in when I feel like I have something intelligent to say.
Sounds good.
Rose.
Hi.
Hi, Rose.
Hi, Michael. How are you today?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing really well.
Good.
Yeah, great. Well, I guess to start off, maybe I'll just ask you a little bit about the series as a whole. I know in our last conversation, you'd mentioned this being a very different series for you. It's coming from a really different place in your process as an artist compared to the paintings you were doing in the recent past, I guess, a few years ago.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. They're more derived from actual experience. So just being in nature. So like, for instance, the leaves, it's just simply like being outside early in the morning and just noticing the sun coming through the leaves. And I think too, just with the pandemic, I don't know whether nature seems to be almost reaching out more, or I'm just becoming more aware, but just the leaves in the morning and just looking at, they were just like diamonds, just filled with light. And they're just leaves laying on the ground. So the leaf paintings were just inspired by that, so I'd take some photographs, but I'd, get back and start painting. And I just try to get back into that awareness, that moment that I was just kind of struck by this light, just this amazing light coming through the leaves.
I'm curious how that's different than the paintings you were making before.
They were more thought out, more symbolic. I struggled a lot more, having an idea, a concept, and then trying to adhere to that concept, where this was a much looser, more of an experience than a concept. So just more spontaneous and more unknown. The process itself, like I don't have a real strong sense of what I'm going to do, even though I start from a photograph. I want the experience itself to come through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're in more of a dialogue. The process is more of a conversation.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, a dialogue. And I think too, just with that process, the end result isn't even as important. The process itself becomes more important. And I noticed, I think it's in your second video that you said that sometimes with your stuff, you just feel like just ripping it up. I just feel like I'm not connecting and I'm going to throw it away, but somehow you stay with it. somehow you're just kind of pulled into it. And I think that's the thing that strengthened it is, and the strength in us as artists is developing this process that can deal with being in the weeds, or deal with thoughts that might come up. Is like, God, I've lost it. Where's my muse? I just don't have, that talent that I feel like I used to have, or, whatever pops up in these, periods of time where it just isn't coming through. But the not coming through is just as much a part of the process as anything else. So it's much like life. We're just getting confronted with this moment where whatever, that mystery is that we're trying to, portray, it just gets lost for a while. Who am I in this moment? I don't feel like an artist, but we continue on, and I think that whole series is sort of, all part of that,
Yeah.
honoring that process, I guess.
It's interesting, Michael, because I take it as a sign that I'm on track, that anytime I start a major new writing project, the feelings at the front are, how in the hell did I get into this? Why am I attempting this? I have no experience at this. This cannot possibly work. And
Totally recognize that. Yeah.
And that seems like now with COVID, that seems like life itself, Every day is, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'll get through.
Yeah. I feel the same.
Often too, I think that art that comes from that more vulnerable place of being willing to not have a plan or ulterior motive, except just being in the moment of your own discovery, speaks to a different part of another person. The audience is going to be impacted in a way that's, maybe more innocent, maybe more vulnerable. I think it gives people permission to like what they like without it needing to be a whole ego trip, of like the fine art, or what we're supposed to like, or what's considered good. It's like, well, what am I naturally drawn to? And that's what I really love. I love these paintings that you've done, as somebody who also just adores flowers. And I think, like this gorgeous, you have it in your background, the morning glory with the moon and the stars at night. Like there's such an innocence to that topic that I just, like, every part of me loves that. And it's not going through any filter of like, oh, what should I like?
Right.
It's just organic.
Yeah, the flowers were interesting because that's like they call it a moonflower, but it's also a datura flower, and they're hallucinant. They're poisonous, but they're also hallucinogenic. And I saw those walking with a friend through a neighborhood in Santa Rosa, and there's an aura around them. There's just some kind of a mysterious aura that pulled me in. And they're kind of they kind of have like a sensuous shape about them. And it was that, because I'd never painted flowers that much before. I never really had a background. It was mostly people. And there's a personality to those flowers. There's just sort of an aura around them. And it's interesting that flowers, are like a mandala. They pull in bees, for fertilization, but they also pull in people.
Yeah. I was very inspired by what you said in regards to flowers. It speaks really deeply to my own life. I'm really in love with flowers, and they've often been the kind of harbingers of certain altered state experiences, just taking a walk and not just stopping to smell the roses, but to smell and to like fall into the what the flower is offering, its beauty is medicine. And it does have, there's all kinds of really magical occult perspectives on flowers, like Bach flower essences, for instance, gets really into the energetic matrices behind every blossom actually having emotional correlations. And I think there's just, whatever anybody believes, I think that there is something really pure about letting ourselves be drawn in and kind of seduced.
Right. And then there's the fragrances too. I mean, which is a whole different, you can't paint them, but they're part of that draw.
Yeah. But if you could, what would you do?
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that there's that influence as well. I'm sure that that's part of it. Yeah.
You
so
also,
go ahead.
Oh, excuse me.
Well, I was just going to say the pandemic definitely is, a part of it, because most of these walks and, just around neighborhoods and stuff, I probably wouldn't have taken. I would have been more locked up and in my head and, doing my work from more of a cerebral place, let's say.
That's really cool. Yeah. Having that time just to wander and wonder. You also have a cactus here, and then another flower too. Can you say a little bit about the cactus?
I think the cactus is the same thing as the sort of the mandala sort of feel, being drawn in. And it's the same thing, was in a yard, and, I had my camera, and I just stopped, and I was just drawn into this, these, cactus leaves just, drawing me in.
So your process, do you feel like part of it, I'm just curious about the process of taking the photos. Do you find that you're going on these walks and you're drawn into a plant or an image or something kind of catches your eye and you take a picture? Like, what's that like? Yeah, what's that process like?
With a camera, I'm just drawn. I'm kind of obsessed. If I see something, I don't care. Sometimes somebody's like working in the yard that I'm seeing this flower or something, and I have to ask permission. I just can't help myself. I'm just drawn into the image, and I want to retain it. And I know that, sometimes it's just the photograph, but sometimes I know I'm going to paint from it. So I don't have a lot of thought, really. It's just kind of a just completely being drawn in.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me because as a photographer myself, when I go out with my camera, it's essentially a meditation. And I've noticed that sort of my intention and my attention shift when I have a camera, because I'll be walking along and I'll just focus on things, or as you say, I'm drawn to certain things that without the camera, the camera facilitates the meditation and makes me stop and look. Just out of curiosity, have you always painted from photographs?
I've always needed photographs to kind of get me started, especially if I'm, doing people and faces and stuff like that. I always use photographs. But now I find myself, using the photograph, but kind of getting lost, moving away from the photograph and kind of getting pulled in also by the experience more. And I think that's the difference. But the same thing with me. It's just like I'll have my cell. So I always have my cell. It's not like, I'm bringing a camera, but I know I have my cell. And it's almost like things magically appear, sometimes when I'm in this certain mode where I'm looking, to take photographs. There'll be just something that will just pull me in. And then I just, I'll just take a number of photographs and then.
Wonder too, do you have in your process, like you take the photo and you're drawing on an iPad, is what I understand.
I draw. I have a stylus and a pad, but I use my computer, so I'm using Photoshop.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're focusing on the image that you're going to be recreating, something that, and I wonder if this sentiment resonates with you, this is something a friend of mine shared with me. It's like, maybe what she said was, maybe part of the process of painting is we're not just painting on a canvas, or in this case using Photoshop, but we're actually imprinting this image in our brains. Like, this amount of focus, we're doing this, each stroke, we're placing it in our own minds.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. I mean, like sort of an imprint that stays with us.
Yeah,
I
that
guess
was, yeah, like
I could
that.
kind of see that.
Kind of like an idea of like samadhi or something.
Yeah, I wonder how much we have to, sort of have something imprinted even in order to paint it. I mean, I think that there's, that the experience, like to say a flower, there's the experience of the flower, and there's, like you were talking about, there's even kind of an emotionality. There's sort of a feeling sense about it, but there's, it's a visual art. So yeah, I'm sure that there's some kind of imprint, and I'm sure that the flower is sort of imprinting on us. It's just like somebody that really well, and you can kind of remember their face or kind of get a sense of, how they look when, they're feeling certain emotions and stuff. It might be the same thing with flowers. And there's also, various degrees of, when flowers start deteriorating. I started getting really intrigued with the beauty of flowers that were starting to droop, when fall started coming, and some of maybe a few of the leaves or a few of the petals have dropped off, and, they're kind of, like an older face, the beauty of somebody's face when they age, the wrinkles, and there's just kind of, there's a different feeling to them, that kind of shows itself up in paintings as well.
So does this series of paintings at all, like if you were to show this to your past self, like is it surprising to you that you've gravitated in this way?
Yeah, I couldn't have imagined. Yeah, I mean, I kind of noticed that in your process when you were painting. I got the feeling that you didn't, 100% know where this was going. You started out where you were going to, you had a certain idea you started out with, but that was the beauty of watching the process, is that you're taken on a journey. And a couple of times where, the film was cut a little bit, and you cut it in a really nice place where all of a sudden it's like magical, kind of a new page has been turned. And I recognize that, in myself, where something will happen and a direction starts appearing. And that's the beauty. I mean, that's the fun of painting. And I would imagine same thing with writing, Patrick, is like you're lost for a while and you start out and like, what am I doing? But then all of a sudden it's almost like the words start coming to you. And
no, it's just a slow, endless grind.
I've read your books. There's got to be a little more than that. Definitely got.
Yeah, I was just having a dramatic moment. I think in any creative art, there's you have to have some kind of awareness or discipline of readying yourself. And sometimes that's by being very rational and thinking it through, especially in writing. When I was a journalist, I thought everything through. It was a rational production. But for more creative forms, and you've got to be ready for it to happen. That said, I can't draw a stick. And so I've always been fascinated. My oldest sister was a wonderful artist, and I've always been fascinated by what you can do. I can arrange type and graphics, but I can't illustrate anything. And
right.
It's like a different function. You know, it's why it fascinates me.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty, as somebody who writes and draws, it's really distinct areas of my personal experience of my brain. Like if we're just keeping it really simple, kind of brain dynamics, it's like the writing part of me. Sometimes I notice when I'm writing a lot, I can't even really draw. I know not everybody has that, but it's like it's just such a different mode. And when I'm drawing a lot, I don't feel so inclined to write. What I like about drawing is that I feel like any mistakes that I make as a visual artist have to inform the journey and be included. Whereas with writing, any mistakes that I make, I can go and I can cut those out.
Right.
And I can obliterate them and nobody has to know.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you can do that in painting, but sometimes in painting, the mistakes are the best part. That's what kind of takes you in a completely different direction.
Yeah, it's more like both are a journey. They're just very different.
Yeah.
Like painting is it, and I think that's what's so cool about you focusing on natural elements and even like psychedelic or medicinal plants that, you know, depending on what you believe, might have a story to tell that's really complex and actually designed to support the human evolution, to like go on a journey with that pattern. Yeah. I mean, there's a big difference between the kind of the psychedelic moonflower and say a pansy or a rose, you know. I mean, there's or some leaves. You have beautiful fall leaves as well.
Yeah. And the difference between a leaf that's dropped off of a tree and it's turned colors in a green leaf.
Yeah.
Completely different stages.
Yeah.
It's interesting because even though have not written a lot of fiction, I think probably the process of fiction is closest to what you're talking about of incorporating mistakes.
Yeah.
Because as I was talking with my friend Wally Lamb in our last episode, in fiction, at least the way he does it and the way I do it, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't construct your characters and tell their story. They tell you. And things can go haywire, you know. Once many years ago, I found out how much Red Book, the women's magazine, paid for short stories. And with a totally mercenary intent, I tried to write one. It had to be, they had a very set formula. It had to be for housewives. Nothing could be too dramatic. You know, it had to engage certain emotions, but not too much. And I thought, okay, this is easy. So I'd written a couple pages about this housewife staring out the kitchen window, and all of a sudden she was gay and she had murdered someone. And I realized I can't do this. I've started on the story and it's taking over, you know.
Yeah, you didn't want to go any farther in that particular story. I get it.
Do either of you as painters have that feeling that it just gets out of control? The process, I mean?
I don't think I ever, because I've never really identified as a painter, or, you know, it's something that I would say for me is more of, it's something I've just done since I was a kid. It's like just more of a part of, I don't really like the word hobby, but I guess it's more of something that I do specifically to release stress and like to soothe myself, where when I'm writing, I'm like crafting. I never feel like I'm trying to be in control when I paint.
When you're painting?
Yeah, I that's not something I've ever, whereas when I'm writing, yeah, I can be more controlling. Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting question, you know, Patrick, being a writer, you know, having emotion be part of the content. I know people that do impressionistic painting more just really work with anger and stuff, where that you can see it in the strokes. I'm sure that emotion is part of what I do, but it's never been to that extent. Where it's, it's just dynamic strokes, or you can see the emotion in the strokes themselves.
Still though, the images that we're looking at, for me, they produce a distinct emotional effect.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, oh, here's where Michael lost it or anything, but there's
I do lose it at times, I have to say.
Probably, although with your earlier portraits, I would say they're even stronger, emotionally.
There's a soothingness, I feel like, to the paintings that you have now that I really love. I really like this series. And they're the kind of paintings that I would like to be around, where I'm like, yeah, like this is the kind of energy and colors and qualities that, as a lover of beauty, like I've always been really into art that's beautiful. As much as I appreciate the emotionality and intensity of pieces that are not trying to be beautiful, when it comes down to like, what do I want around me? I want beauty. I want harmonizing elements. And I feel like your paintings are kind of like, they have a companion quality.
They came from uplifting experiences. So that it just makes sense to me. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring. And it's, I guess it's much more than just, okay, I took a photograph of this flower or this leaf and the light's coming through it. That it's almost just like a pointer to the experience itself. And if things are working, then some of that well-beingness is also in the painting.
Yeah.
Howdy, folks. I've been reading a book entitled Bullshit Jobs by a British anthropologist named David Graeber. Based on extensive surveys conducted among people from all walks of life with all kinds of jobs, he has come to the conclusion that in Western society, fully 1/3 to 1/2 of all workers are engaged in what he identifies as bullshit jobs. That is, employment that feels meaningless, achieves no positive result for society at large, and bores the crap out of the workers themselves. Graeber came to this conclusion not by analyzing employment statistics or making his own judgment calls about the value of different kinds of employment, but by listening to workers themselves. In other words, it's the people working bullshit jobs who named their own predicament that way. Graeber recounts the story of coming across an old friend who had been a talented poet and musician in his youth, but found it impossible to make a living that way. He eventually opted for corporate law in order to pay the bills. And for years, he had hated every well-paid minute of it. Graeber then asks the question, what does it say about our society that it seems to generate an extremely limited demand for talented poet-musicians, but an apparently infinite demand for specialists in corporate law? This question was kind of poignant for me. When I was a little bit younger and just entering the professional workforce, I was employed by a graphic design firm that provided finished commercial artwork to major advertising agencies in San Francisco. I was good at what I did, typography and design, and sometimes I threw in a little unauthorized editing of the copywriting that came from the agencies. And I usually got notes of appreciation in return. This gave me the tempting idea that I could eventually make my way into an ad agency myself as a copywriter and make a fortune in a lucrative industry. But something bothered me about all the ad work that I helped turn out. Our clients ranged all over the map, from junk food producers to big pharmaceutical companies to a smattering of environmental advocacy lobbies like the Sierra Club, as well as their nemesis, the big oil companies like Chevron. One day, hoping for a philosophical moment with my boss, I asked him how he felt about the wide variety of social forces, some of them contradicting each other, that we helped promote. His answer was blunt. Garbage in, garbage out. We just make garbage look good. Now get back to work. To make a long story short, that's why I quit that job the day after I was offered a promotion to middle management. I enjoyed the work, but I couldn't get past my misgivings about prettying up garbage. And I had the distinct feeling that if I eventually did rise to success in advertising, I'd end up putting a lot of garbage out there. No matter how much money I might make along the way, I'd have ended up with a bullshit career. Flash forward a handful of decades, and we see the whole of civilization struggling with the results of what could fairly be called a garbage-producing economy. I'll go out on a limb here to say that the world would be a lot better off with more reasonably paid poet-musicians and fewer corporate lawyers making obscene amounts of money. I was actually surprised at Graeber's finding that such a high proportion of workers, 1/3 to 1/2, identify their jobs as bullshit, because I hardly know anyone in that predicament. That's because my fateful decision decades ago put me into the lifelong company of creative artists, particularly writers. Thus, I know lots of people who struggle to get by economically, while remaining fiercely devoted to their art form, whatever it may be. But there are no corporate lawyers of my acquaintance. Of course, you can become a huge success in an art form, from writing to music to design. But it's definitely the exception to the rule in our society. The economic and social crises we are going through now have given us a huge, if unwanted, opportunity to start remaking our culture from the ground up. And one good ground level strategy is this: support your local creative artists, however unfamous they may be, or become one, even if you feel you're currently trapped in a bullshit job. You might just change the world for the better. And that said, let's close out this episode of the Fearless Hour, dedicated to creativity, with a different kind of meditation than we've used before. We're going to watch a multi-talented artist, Rose Pearson, take us through the healing process of her own artwork.
Hey there, everybody. Today I'm going to be working on an idea that I got in meditation this morning. This will be part 1. This idea came because I've been feeling really down, really blue, really sad, and I've been opening to the possibility of joy. You know, when you're feeling depressed, sort of unwarranted optimism can actually be more depressing. And what I find to be authentically helpful is just to be neutrally open to the possibility of having some kind of happiness in that day. So I just opened to that, like, hey, I'm open, I'm down for that. And I got this beautiful image of a sunflower kind of emerging from these clouds, these pink and golden clouds. I came up with some interesting tips, actually, that I've been applying, and with great success. I'm going through a little bit of a depressive cycle. You know, these things happen. And we kind of have a little bit of a fear, a drama response to that word. But I think it's natural and normal, and if we can respond to it with calm and just like, hey, you know, there's a season for everything, then it makes it a lot easier. So one of the ideas that I had that I've been applying is to not plan anything and not specifically to move into fantasy. Actually, I'm gonna edit that. It's not that you don't want to plan. You want to plan in a very specific way, and you certainly don't want to fantasize about your day. So when I say fantasize, it's like the night before or that morning, waking up and being like, today's the day that I'm going to have a totally different experience, and I'm going to get this done and that done, and I'm going to look great, and I'm going to call back all these people and dress well and do all that and eat well and etc. and exercise. And we set ourselves up for disappointment because it's expectations that are far exceed what we're actually capable of doing for this cycle. And so I make a firm rule, no fantasizing at all. We stay right in the present moment. And then for planning, what I like to do is I like to plan micro movements. So what I'll do is I'll have a piece of paper and I'll say, okay, what's the next 3 things? And I'll write them down. It'll literally be like, get out of bed, get some tea, and sit down to meditate. And then I will cross those things off the list as I do them. And then I'll write another 3 things, like meditate for 5 minutes, make bed, stretch for 2 minutes, and I'll cross them off again. So that way there's this really gentle build of progress. And there isn't like a huge to-do list. It's really just in the moment. And that really, really helps. If you're feeling particularly blue and really depressed, it can help to coach yourself out loud to do very micro movements like step or move blanket or sit up. And that way it's like very accomplishable. I've been doing that for the past 2 days and it's been really successful. And I'm really, really glad to have that tool. So I thought it would be nice to offer it to you. And hopefully it will assist you in your, cycle of sadness that will inevitably come to a close, and the sun will rise again, and all will be well. Hello everyone, good morning, welcome. I started this painting a few weeks ago and I shared with you a bit on my process, and this is a continuation of that. One thing about this painting is many times I really didn't like the way it looked. It seemed to be going in directions that I projected as unsatisfactory, and there were times I wanted to crumple it up and throw it away. And I've learned that that's typically an indicator that I'm both growing and taking a risk creatively. I think it's really cool how art reflects life. The philosophical question, I can't remember its origins, but does art copy life and life copy art, or imitate? Life imitates art, or art imitates life? And I think there's lots of ways to discuss that question. But one way that I see art imitating life is that art is a part of life, and therefore in the little microcosm of this page with these paints, the principles of life unfold and play out. And I know for me, whenever I take a creative risk in any area of my life, there's usually going to be a phase where I'm projecting total failure and wanting to give up. And there's a few choices that I can make. I can give up, and sometimes that's a great choice. Sometimes it's good to stick with it and be pleasantly surprised. Maybe it's not so bad as I thought, or it's actually wonderful. Or maybe the lessons that I derived from the process are worth the time and the work it took to get there, even if the end result isn't what I wanted. So just appreciating that occurrence with the sunflower. There is something also that I was feeling inspired to share with you, though it's a bit complex as far as the minute I have left to kind of try and cram it in there. But maybe I'll just try to sum it up. With this cycle of sadness I've been in, one of my primary goals has been to be really, really soft and loving with myself, and find that balance between deep acceptance and also recognizing where I do have agency and when I can implement my will and move towards happiness. So I've been doing this writing practice in the morning, and I look forward to describing it more. But essentially, it's this process of writing my fears and resentments first thing, which initially felt counterintuitive because obviously we've all heard it's important to start the day with our gratitudes, our affirmations, like very overt positivity. But what I'm figuring out is that actually when I get the fear and anger off my chest that's sort of right below the surface, I'm kind of taking the fuel right out of my anxiety and depression first thing. And I'm able to have a clearer space in my heart, in my mind. I'll link the description of that process. I learned it from a woman named Anna Runkle. And I just wanted to share a little bit about it because in the last 5 days I've been doing it, and I think I've had some of the best mornings so far. And I think that's part of how this sunflower grew to gain a little tear. Part of this process has been to really honor my sadness, my fear, and to be in a place of trust, not because the circumstances look ideal, but because I can trust that life is oriented towards love ultimately, and that everything is working towards that in each moment, and I'd like to work with it.